Welcome to Lesson 8, Maintaining Biodiversity. My name's Mrs. Sheriff. I'm a Director of Science. This lesson is taken from the Biology B7 Ecology unit. Throughout the lesson you'll see this sign. Please make some notes to help you understand and recall the content. So here's the starter. Write down 3 effects of deforestation. For the extension, slightly more challenging, what impact does deforestation have on the water cycle? I'm going to give you 1 minute starting from now. So, starting with the first reason, trees are where carbon dioxide is locked up by the process of photosynthesis. If you remove trees, there's therefore going to be less photosynthesis and more carbon dioxide in the atmosphere, and this can result in global warming. Another reason is that trees are often burnt when cut, often used as fuel. This process of combustion also releases carbon dioxide into the atmosphere, which further increases the greenhouse effect and therefore global warming. You'll probably know from your own experience that trees often have lots and lots of different organisms living on them. So if we do remove trees, we're going to be reducing the number of living organisms on that tree, but also within that area. And as a result, it's going to reduce biodiversity. So here's the extension. What impact does deforestation have on the water cycle? You may recall the water cycle from a few lessons ago, where transpiration was part of it. Transpiration is where water is lost from the leaves via a process of evaporation. It involves water moving from the roots up the xylem and then out through the leaves into the atmosphere, causing the atmosphere to be quite humid. So with deforestation, there's going to be less transpiration, resulting in a drier climate. This will lead to dry soils and desert-like conditions where very few things can grow. Dryness can also lead to erosion and landslides. So here are the learning outcomes for this lesson. The challenge outcome is to describe both positive and negative human interactions in an ecosystem. You'll aspire to explain how human interactions impact biodiversity. So what is biodiversity? A reminder from last lesson. It's the variety of all the different species of organisms on Earth or within an ecosystem. It's basically a measure of how many different species there are within a geographical area. And those species can include animals, plants, fungi and microorganisms. Biodiversity isn't the same across the planet though. We have areas of high biodiversity, such as the coral reef or tropical rainforests. These areas are considered to be highly stable, So it means that one species isn't heavily dependent on another. There's basically numerous things that are available for a species to survive, such as its food source, not just reliant on one, or shelter, but also the way in which the environment is maintained. So the opposite of high biodiversity is areas where not many species can survive. So areas such as the desert or polar regions, where only a few species are able to survive such extreme conditions. Other reasons for low biodiversity unfortunately involve human activities such as deforestation, or polluting areas with landfill and sewage, but also poaching. So looking at one example of a habitat in more detail, the coral reef system, known as the Great Barrier Reef, is the largest in the world, and it stretches for around 1,600 miles, 133,000 miles squared in area. Its size is so vast that it can be seen from outer space, and it's the largest structure on Earth made purely by living organisms. So coral is basically a thin layer of calcium carbonate, and on top of this layer there's like a living mat of organisms known as coral polyps. It's these coral polyps that make up the coral reef system and provide food for millions of different species. This is what gives the coral reef system its high biodiversity, having such a vast array of food systems. It's important to maintain these levels of biodiversity, and scientists know that there are major factors affecting the health of the reef system. One of these is climate change. There are national programs that protect the coral reefs, especially the Great Barrier Reef. After tracking the average weekly surface temperature of the oceans over a year, scientists have found that they can keep a check on how the reefs are affected by these temperature changes. So on this diagram, shown here at the right, you can see that the yellow and orange represent hotter waters, and the green, blue and purple represent progressively cooler waters. It's been possible to see how sensitive reefs are to temperature change, and it can show where they're flourishing and where they're suffering. They've also discovered that pollution plays a negative role, and those are the two things, climate change and pollution, that humans can be held responsible for and are negatively impacting the Great Barrier Reef and other coral reef systems. Of all the species that have ever lived, more than 99% are now extinct. Most have quietly disappeared. But there have been certain occasions when the extinction rates have risen rapidly in short periods, and these have been recorded as the Big Five. Watch this clip to get an overview, and also see whether or not we're currently in the middle of the 6th mass extinction.
The theory or the idea of the sixth extinction is very simple, just that there have been 5 major mass extinctions in the last 500 million years, in which roughly 3/4 of the species on Earth disappeared. The 5th is the most famous, and that's the one 66 million years ago, the event that did in the dinosaurs. And there's a pretty broad scientific consensus that that was caused by an asteroid impact. This time, humans are the asteroid. My name is Elizabeth Colbert, and I'm an environmental journalist. The current rates of extinction are certainly hundreds of times, and quite possibly thousands of times, and quite possibly tens of thousands of times higher than background extinction rates. The kind of extinction rates that you would expect to see during a mass extinction event. We're causing it by habitat destruction, cutting down the rainforests in the Amazon and in Indonesia so that species just have nowhere to go. Simply killing things, overfishing, overharvesting, poaching. We're causing it by moving things around the world, which we don't perceive as so dangerous, but which ends up moving a lot of diseases around the world. So global trade, global travel, species are encountering each other that have evolved separately for many millions of years, and that can lead to terrible disasters. And then looming in the background over all of these are issues like climate change and ocean acidification. At the bottom of all of this is the fact that we're consuming so much of the world's resources. If you have one species that's consuming such a vast proportion of the world's resources, what's left for everyone else? It took billions of years to get to this point, and we're destroying it very, very rapidly, right? So we're sort of rewinding evolution. That's a pretty serious thing to be doing. And if you don't really care about that, if you don't care about any of the other species that we share the planet with, then, I'm not exactly sure what you care about. But even if you just say, okay, well, I really don't. I just care about people, my family and my friends, myself, then I think there's still reason to care, because there's a big, big question mark over, how far we can push these systems before we ourselves are in a lot of trouble.
I'd like you now to think of things that you're doing to protect ecosystems such as the coral reef or rainforests. You might not know it, but whenever you're recycling, that's one such example, you are actually having a bigger impact. So think of things that you're doing that are going to help our environment, either in the home or on a daily basis at school. What sort of things are you doing that protect our ecosystems? I'm going to give you 30 seconds starting from now. So let's see if you got any of these. Starting with reduce, reuse, recycle, ensuring we're not removing all our natural resources from the earth and not using up landfill space. Number 2, using less transport and biking more to reduce pollution levels. Number 3, shop wisely, reusing shopping bags. Number 4, choosing sustainable fish to maintain populations within oceans. Number 5, thinking about the chemicals we use and what we're putting into our waterways. Some can be very toxic. Number 6, using energy efficient light bulbs and switching electrical appliances off to reduce greenhouse gas emissions. Number 7, planting more trees so they take in more carbon dioxide through photosynthesis. Number 8, conserving water so less waste goes into our oceans. Number 9, being a volunteer within your local community, so helping clean up certain parts. And finally, number 10, educating others, because once you learn about how to protect the environment, you can help others to understand too. This poster is from the National Oceanic Service in America, but this basic message of how to protect your planet can be applied everywhere. So just revisiting our learning outcomes. Our challenge was to describe both positive and negative human interactions in an ecosystem. The Aspire was to explain how human interactions impact biodiversity. There's probably some of this that you can do already. Let's take a look at the next few slides to help you understand both fully. So what are we doing that causes a reduction in biodiversity? Well, we all know that deforestation, pollution, global warming, overpopulation of our species can contribute to the loss of habitats. Large species and those living in forests and oceans are mostly affected, and some experts predict that around 30% of all species will become extinct by 2050. When we remove natural barriers, species that normally remain constrained within that barrier are then free to invade other ecosystems. This would ruin the balance of an ecosystem, and it only takes something small to do that. It's the freshwater ecosystems that are particularly sensitive to this. Overexploitation is caused by activities such as overfishing, overhunting, excessive logging, and the illegal trade of wildlife. Over 25% of global fisheries are being overfished at unsustainable levels. So by now, we know that global warming is a major cause of the loss of biodiversity. If the present rate of global warming continues, then coral reefs, which, as we've seen already, are biodiversity hotspots, will disappear in around 20 to 40 years. So we've seen some worrying statistics here about the reduction in biodiversity, and it's happening at a dramatic rate, largely due to human activity. So what are we doing to maintain biodiversity? Well, thankfully, people are becoming increasingly aware of the importance and the effect of human threats on our ecosystems. Scientists and concerned citizens have put programs in place to reduce these negative effects. Now I'm going to give you 4 ways in which we can help to maintain biodiversity. On each of the slides that show this, you'll see a box in yellow like this, which contains some key words. Write down these keywords and make sure that you can explain in your own words exactly how that particular method aims to maintain biodiversity. And if you don't understand it, play the clip again and see if you can do it again. But it'd be useful for you to know with some key examples. So starting with breeding programs. Breeding programs aim to restore endangered species to a sustainable population, but the problem is that it's really difficult. Rare animals and plants don't reproduce easily or very quickly, and artificial breeding programs need to avoid inbreeding. You may have heard about a recent case of the giant pandas in Hong Kong. Giant pandas are notorious for not being able to breed quickly, and in fact it's taken 10 years for the pandas to reach sexual maturity in captivity. Now recently, due to the lockdown, there's been fewer people coming to see the pandas, and it has resulted in a natural mating. Historically, they've tried IVF, but unfortunately that resulted in many miscarriages. So fingers crossed this results in a pregnancy. Our very own Yorkshire Wildlife Park has been involved in a breeding programme involving the Amur tiger. It was hunted to near extinction by poachers, and its habitat had disappeared almost completely, with only around 40 left in the wild. Thankfully, due to the help of the Yorkshire Wildlife Park and to international efforts, we now have around 450 tigers in its native Russia. Number 2, regenerating rare habitats. There are many habitats that are becoming increasingly rare, and the plant and animal species that are adapted to living in them are under threat. Thankfully, people and certain groups are protecting and regenerating these areas, and as a result, the biodiversity is maintained and stabilised, and even in some cases it can be increased. Heathland is one example, lowland heath to be specific. In the UK, there's only about 20% of it left over the last 200 years, with a large proportion of it disappearing fast due to development. It's got some unique features, including a highly acidic soil, and it's a home to a variety of wild species. There are programs to regenerate lost heathland by removing trees, reversing drainage, and allowing cows and ponies to graze wild. So another rare habitat includes the mangroves. These forests are found in tropical regions along the coastline, and they survive in saline water. Saline just means salty. Their position means they have a job of protecting these shorelines from damaging storms, waves and floods. They prevent erosion with their tangled root systems, which also provide a habitat for young fish. Humans have cleared the forest for land to be used for agriculture or the tourism trade, but also the wood is rather useful. On the next slide, I'd like to watch a clip about the Mangrove Action Project, which is helping to save these amazing ecosystems. If you can, make some notes as to why they are disappearing.
The contribution of mangroves to our local marine ecosystem is invaluable. One organization is on a mission to spread that message around the world.
Number 3, planting hedgerows. You'd probably never imagined that hedgerows could be so important for biodiversity, but they really are. Farmers use hedgerows for separating areas belonging to different people. They can also be used to keep animals in certain places. In recent years, farmers have been removing hedgerows to make bigger fields to grow a single crop. It's easier to tend using machines such as combine harvesters. Their removal, however, is reducing biodiversity. Gradually, farmers are replanting hedgerows and leaving wildflower margins around the edges of their field to increase the biodiversity again. Number 4, making it political. A number of political parties have raised this as an issue, and the most common one here in the UK is the Green Party. However, there are a number of activists who want things done a lot quicker. For example, Extinction Rebellion want governments to declare a climate and ecological emergency so that they take immediate action. They've held protests in the centre of the capital to enable their voice to be heard. So here's a bit of exam practice. The elephant is likely to become extinct in parts of Africa. Use the information below to explain 3 reasons why. The African elephant eats lots of trees and other plants for food. In Africa, the human population is increasing and more food is needed to feed the extra people. More trees are cut down for fuel and to clear land for growing crops. Elephants are killed by poachers who want the ivory from their tusks. A herd of elephants needs a large area in which to live and feed. And this question's worth 3 marks. So, if we were going to bug this question, we'd box the command word explain, and I've also underlined a few key parts. Because it's worth 3 marks, it will take you approximately 3 minutes to answer it, or less. So, pause the video here, have a go at answering, and then check your answers on the next slide. So let's take a look at some possible answers. Any 3 of these would get you the mark. Killed by poachers for tusks or ivory. Not enough food for elephants because humans cut down trees. Not enough space because more's used by people or agriculture. Food or space is destroyed by humans, and they can be killed for food. So just revisiting our learning outcomes again, the challenge was to describe both positive and negative human interactions in an ecosystem. And the aspire is to explain how human interactions impact biodiversity. The final few slides will hopefully help embed both of these outcomes. This final slide is about conflicting pressures. There are certain things that go against how we want to maintain biodiversity, and some of those reasons are to do with human livelihoods. Here's a few. Development. So land is in high demand, for example, for housing or new agricultural land in certain developing countries. Food security. Pests and predators are killed to produce more food, but unfortunately the food chain is affected. Affects livelihood. So the tree felling industry provides jobs. So if deforestation was halted, it could result in unemployment, which affects the local economy. And lastly, costs. The governments pay farmers a subsidy to introduce hedgerows and field margins. Therefore, in order to ensure this is done, they have to be monitored, and the regulations are costly. So despite efforts to maintain biodiversity, there are lots of conflicting pressures that need to be taken into account. Conflicts between protecting biodiversity and saving money, or conflicts between protecting biodiversity and saving lives. Hopefully you know who this is, Sir David Attenborough. He has inspired millions, myself included, by bringing the natural world into our homes through series such as The Blue Planet or Planet Earth. Sir David has educated millions of us to understand and appreciate the world around us, making us increasingly aware of the importance of conservation.
We hoped that Blue Planet 2 would open people's eyes to the damage that we are doing to our oceans and the creatures that live in them. I've been absolutely astonished at the result that that programme has had. I never imagined there would be quite so many of you who would be inspired to want change. You've been on beaches with thousands more of you than ever before picking up rubbish.
We live so close to beaches and our water, we don't really want it just to be all full of plastic.
Families have changed their habits.
For me, the Blue Planet 2 was a pivotal point. I think there are so many things that people can do.
And schools and communities across the country have searched for ways to reduce their single-use plastic footprint.
So we've moved away from single-use plastic, so all of a sudden the 400 plates that we were wasting can be reused, washed and reused again.
What is more, the strength of your response has not gone unnoticed in the corridors of power or business boardrooms.
More than 40 companies have signed up to an initiative to cut plastic pollution in Britain.
Plastic bottles, plastic pollution.
Tackling the scourge of plastic.
We must reduce the demand for plastic.
Coffee cups,
Plastic
Bottles,
plastic
chopsticks.
Everyone has woken up to the need for action.
even as far away as China, change is happening.
所以我们特地成立了这样一个蓝色星球计划。
Right now, 8 million tons of plastics ends up in our oceans every year. But you, by your responses, have shown that if we start doing those small steps that are easily achievable, we can, before long, really have an effect. If you want to join in, find out easy ways to make a difference and share with us what you're up to. Visit bbc.co.uk/plasticswatch. The actions of any just one of us may seem to be trivial and to have no effect, but the knowledge that there are thousands, hundreds of thousands of people who are doing the same thing, that really does have an effect. So please join us.
So you've reached the final slide of this lesson. It's time to complete the Google form as a plenary, and any notes you've made you can use to help you answer the questions. You'll receive a mark immediately after you submit your form. There's a research task attached to this lesson too, so I'd like you to research the top 15 animals that are the most endangered species on our planet. Why are they at risk of becoming extinct? How many are left? And what measures are we taking to prevent this? If you prefer, you can display your information in a table format. In addition to this, you might want to watch the Blue Planet series found on BBC iPlayer. It's got some obvious links to this topic, but also it's got some amazing, incredible footage, and it's a really good watch. If you get a chance to, there's two series, Blue Planet and Blue Planet 2. Secondly, I recommend a book called The Sixth Extinction, An Unnatural History by Elizabeth Kolbert. We saw Elizabeth Kolbert talk to us earlier about the sixth extinction on a clip, and she discussed how humans were causing the problems. And in the book she describes humans as ecology's neighbours from hell. Worth a read. So thank you for taking part in this lesson. I hope you enjoyed it.